Hello, everyone. This is a discussion of this chapter, Make It Work, What We Can Learn About the Writing Process from Watching Project Runway by April Brannon and Ellie Yarbrough. I really have been looking forward to discussing this with you. I think there's some interesting points here. I know some of you have already expressed some healthy skepticism, I would say, and others were very enthusiastic about it. So maybe we can just discuss the article, see what we think about some of these points that these authors are making. So the big question, I guess, is why Project Runway? And I've asked this question about all of these various pop culture elements that people have discussed, the film noir, that sort of thing. Okay, fine. Pop culture in the classroom is great, but how do you decide what aspect of pop culture you want to bring in? Why Project Runway instead of Hell's Kitchen, for example? So we'll see what we make of their argument there. But anyway, they think there's something special about Project Runway. And they started here. This is on page 111. If viewers, and first of all, I have to admit, I've never seen this show. Apparently, it's on Bravo. There's a picture from the Eye Candy episode. If you are like me, I'd love to hear from you, especially if you are familiar with the show. I'm sure you can shed some insight into this. But anyway, the quotation on page 111 says, "If viewers look beyond the sequins and feathers, they will find a fascinating portrayal of the creative process. And since the writing process is a creative process, what Project Runway offers is a useful glimpse into the writing process." Yeah, no, it almost sounds a little circular, that argument. But I think it's probably true from what I infer from their description of the show that this what these designers do on the show does sound a lot like my writing process anyway, that I go through, a very recursive process with a heavy emphasis on revision and feedback. I try to encourage these things. If you're not convinced by that sort of argument there, have no fear. They'll go into much more scholarship here in a few minutes, right? But here's a couple of the off-the-cuff remarks. One, they say that modeling the writing process for students is difficult, if not impossible. And I know I have talked to a few instructors before. Some of my colleagues have actually tried to model this process. They'll get up in front of their class, open up Microsoft Word, or perhaps write on the whiteboard, and just maybe they've got one of their assignments for their class, and they'll sit there and try to brainstorm and come up with a thesis statement, research question, all this stuff sort of on the spot. I would never try to do that. I think that being up in front of a classroom would make me nervous and anxious, and it wouldn't be anything like my real process when I'm at home and very isolated, and I don't have not self-conscious at all because I know no one is watching. I don't know, maybe for other people that would be fine, but it does seem to be true. That approach would be problematic. In any case, I don't know too many professional writers that compose that way, up in front of a big audience who can watch their every move. That said, I don't think that is the only way you could model this process. I know of several digital tools. For example, Microsoft Word has a track changes tool built into it. There was another product. I'm blanking on the name of it right now, but there was a couple of these actually. And what they would let you do, it would look like a word processor. And it would just you could type into it and it would record all of your keystrokes, all of your backspaces, mistakes. And then when you were done, it would actually let you play this whole thing back as a movie, which was really cool. And you can find some of these on YouTube. See if I can link to some of those. But I think, that you don't have somebody there, big classroom staring at you. So it's pretty easy to forget that that's recording. And I think that's a way to model this process. So I didn't see anything like that mentioned in this article, but, it could be something you could look at. So anyway, that's one of the arguments. And they'll talk more about why this is important in a minute. The second one is this idea, sort of an attack on process pedagogy in general. And we'll get more into this. But there has been some criticisms raised about this process. And if these criticisms are justified, then it makes sense that he would be looking at a way to facilitate what they call the post-process methods, and they think this show is a springboard for that. Question you might raise is, well, okay, maybe it's a springboard, but what about all the other possible springboards? What makes this particularly useful as a springboard? So that's the argument I come back to. But all that said, maybe I'll stop before we get into this literature, and just so far, right off the top, what do you make of this argument about Project Runway? Were you surprised to see this article, this topic? Are you excited about it? Are you skeptical? Let's just get your sort of off the cuff remarks or thoughts on it. Okay, so now moving into this literature that they cite, and they cite quite a few articles, and I'm familiar with most of these. I don't know if you are. Some of them I definitely think you should be. They'll come up time and time again as you progress on. Janet Imig and Donald Murray, certainly very familiar names in composition circles. Unsurprisingly, why that would be the case, since they helped to come up with this process model that most of us use today. I was just talking with some colleagues about this product model that you sometimes see, and those of you that work in the right place know all about this problem. But basically, the gist of it is you want to intervene in the student's writing process, the way they compose, come up with ideas, edit, revise. That's something that you can learn about and teach as a compositionist. You don't just have to, what you don't want, or I guess the product model would just be to say, okay, students, go write a 3-page essay, then you grade the essay, and that's it. The process model lets you get in there and start teaching some different methods, different strategies for writing. Now, truth be told, I always wondered if this was a bit of a straw man. Is there anybody that really teaches that simplistic of a product model? Maybe. It seems like all the teachers I've ever had have had something to say about how you go about writing. But anyway, Imig and Murray were definitely pioneers in this field. They also cite one of my professors. This is kind of weird seeing him mentioned. Gary Olson. I studied under him at University of South Florida. And the thing that they talked about, I heard him talk about many times, this idea of a post-process. They see this sort of pre-writing or you might do something like brainstorm. And then you have let's say a rough draft phase, drafting phase, editing phase, several different phases to it, revision, proofreading. So Olson and others have said this is really, it's nice in theory perhaps, but it's not really how writers go about writing. There's a lot of what they call recursivity. So you might, for example, just start writing, do a little brainstorming, and then go back and maybe edit something, revise, draft some more, revise, edit. So you're just kind of going all over the place. There's no lockstep approach. That's one problem. I think another problem is just any kind of one-size-fits-all approach. No matter what it is, people are different, right? And they're not going to all write the same way. They're not going to use. Doesn't matter what the process is that you come up with. Not every writer is going to use it, right? Not going to find it useful. And so those are some arguments. Probably more importantly for Olson, though, is ignoring the context. Again, imagining that there's any kind of writing process you could use that would work in all situations. Of course, this is just a few minutes of reflection, you would realize this is ridiculous. For example, if you have a timed essay where you have to write a timed essay in say 20 minutes, you're not going to use the same process that you would if it was a take-home exam, right? They also talked about the value of written reflections, and they cite a couple of scholars on this. And I think these would be good sources for you for most essays you might write about composing, including for this class. And they mentioned several, and I think we probably have most of these in the library if you need some sources for your paper. But they do make a point here, and I think this is probably true. Composition classrooms are the only place where students would be asked to really reflect on their own writing process. So I think it seems true to me. When I read that, I started thinking, is that true? Are there other places? I'm not really sure. I can't think of any, but I wanted to turn it around and ask you if you knew of any, or as a matter of fact, is the composition classroom the only place where you've ever been asked to reflect on your writing process? Okay. Now, moving on, we've got Bill Strong quoted here. What to make of this? So the argument is metaphorical thinking helps us understand big ideas. And I guess one of the big ideas is how you understand your own writing process, your own creative process. And a metaphor would help you to understand that. That's kind of an old idea. I guess it goes all the way, at least back to Aristotle, right? But Strong apparently criticizes the composition process. In particular, he says it's very crude, this idea of drafting, revision. It's too logical, too schematic. So we need some type of metaphor to help us understand it better. That makes a certain amount of sense. Again, I have to wonder, well, if that's okay, fine, but why Project Runway? There are many other metaphors you could use. I'm not sure how to pronounce this person's name. Dieter? Brock Dieter's Acts of Revision. Now, this part, it was kind of almost a little side piece of the chapter, but I really found this I really like this. I want to read this whole book after reading this little snippet from it about these 8 limiting beliefs about revision. I know I've suffered a lot of these myself, and I do notice, I'm sure you have as well, maybe in your own response to feedback and revision, as well as what you see in your students, how harmful these beliefs can be. So anyway, that really attracted my attention. I'm very curious. I want to read more of Dieter's work in that regard. And then they also talked about Karen Fitz and John Dewey. That's going pretty far back. And trying to establish a link between pop culture in Fitz's case and then personal knowledge on Dewey's case to facilitate educational growth. And again, I would go even further back to Quintilian. He talks about this also in his Institutes of Oratory, this idea that it helps, and I think this is just common sense, right? If you want to teach a new process, be it writing, be it any process, it's very helpful if you can relate that to a process the student's already familiar with, if they already know it. Maybe if they are fans of a Project Runway, it could be that. Or if they are fans of Hell's Kitchen, it could be that. Or I guess it could be, learning to write a paper is like learning to ride a bicycle, right? Or learning to ice fish. If really the only important thing is that whatever that process is that you want to relate it to is something the students are already intimately familiar with. Okay, so then they get around to telling us some of their activities from their classroom that involve Project Runway. And I really liked both of these. I love this one about the cut and pasting the fat papers. I thought that was excellent. They would bring in, they would tell the students to write basically twice. Well, you remember from the article, so maybe they had to turn in a 2-page essay, so they write a 4-page essay, and then they come in there with butcher paper and scissors and literally cut this thing up and shuffle it all around. I thought this was a fabulous idea. I'm really would love to try something like this. I'm almost positive it would have some interesting results. Definitely would help the students break out of this mentality of they can't revise, or revision is tedious or boring or something. It definitely sounds like a way to liven things up. I just want to stop right there and get your take on that. Does this whole cut and paste fat papers idea strike you as something useful? The second piece they talked about was feedback. And I didn't think this one, I don't know about, maybe your thoughts are different than mine. I wanted a little bit more specifics on this. They talked about this, I guess, critic or judge on the show named Tim Gunn. And they said, well, you could, to sort of get students thinking about feedback, you could show them this episode called Eye Candy and look at how Gunn talks to the contestants on there. But apparently the feedback wasn't very good in that episode. So you have to go on the web and find some bonus material, I guess, where he's given more explicit feedback. And again, I can think sort of in general terms, okay, I guess any modeling of feedback would be useful to students. I kept thinking, of all these other shows out there where there are more opportunities for feedback, the various America's Got Talent shows or Britain's Got Talent, maybe even Hell's Kitchen, although that can be very negative feedback. Why not the painter Bob Ross? The joy of painting. And the feedback that he would give, very nice feedback. So anyway, I guess my criticism of that is I wanted a little bit more, something more tangible like that cut and pasting fat papers. I like to see more of that, those sorts of activities that would justify the Project Runway show as opposed to any other pop culture show. Anyway, as always, I'd like to hear your thoughts on the article. And if you have any questions that you would like me to consider, just post those as well. And hope to see you next time.